Hey, this is Greg Kesich at the Portland Press Herald, and I'm here with Bill Nemitz.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Our guest today is Kelley Bouchard, whose name you probably know from reading the paper. Kelley's the reporter for South Portland, Cape Elizabeth,
and Scarborough.
And she's also one of the best feature writers we've ever had at the paper. And it's really, I just worked with Kelley for, 20 years. I think we worked in the Biddeford office back in
I started
90s.
At the end of 98.
Yeah,
so.
Biddeford office? What's
that? Yeah. And Kelley wrote a really extraordinary story in the Sunday paper. The headline was "The Girl in the Next Room." It begins with an image of a 12-year-old girl running down a dark road at night, terrified for her life, looking for help. Kelley, who was that girl?
That was Sarah Perry. She was, I don't know if you said she was 12 years old at the time in 1994 when her mother was brutally murdered in their home on a country road in Bridgeton. Yeah, they lived in a little ranch. Her mother had worked really hard to save up the money to buy this little house for them. She was a hand stitcher at a local shoe shop, and Sarah Perry went to bed one night and woke up in the midnight hours to her mother's screams. And when she finally dared to venture out into the rest of the house, she found her mother dead in the kitchen.
Pretty brutally murdered, too. Right?
Very brutally murdered.
And
like that's a cliche, brutally murdered. Like this was really...
Right. And this, I think we should say, this was in 1993?
1994.
1994.
In May. And so that little girl was running down, if I'm not mistaken, she's in her night clothes, barefoot, running down the road. When she finally had the presence of mind to leave, she tries to make a call, and for various reasons was unable to make a call, and just runs several houses, banging on the door, till finally she gets to, I think it's the Venetian, and the people who ran the restaurant lived on the property, and she finally reached somebody. They opened the door to her, and
Can you imagine what a horrifying sight that must be?
Yeah.
To open your door to a 12-year-old girl whose mother's just been murdered.
Or can you imagine being the 12-year-old girl? It's like it's an actual nightmare. It's the kind of thing people who have nightmares have,
right.
But it was actually happening to her. Let's skip ahead. That was 23 years ago, and you talked to her now.
I did. I talked to her last week. She was gracious enough to afford me an hour and a half. It was a quick interview in Bridgeton. She was in Maine for some readings. She's promoting her book, After the Eclipse. It's named that because 2 days before her mother was killed, they saw an eclipse. And for more reasons than one, it's an appropriate image. She is a gracious, sweet-natured, petite, pretty woman who spent the last 6 years, starting in grad school, just going through every document, every police report, every document she could find, interviewing family and friends, and using her journals. She kept diaries as a kid, I think from the time she was 8 on, very detailed, and even today still, even if it's just a list, keeps track of her life, and made created a stunning book that is not only so detailed and self-exposing, but it's also really well written.
She had wanted from a very early age to be a writer.
Yes.
In fact, there was a teacher at her school who encouraged that even after the murder, right?
Yes, a teacher, Liz Shane, who's now an administrator in the school district there.
What struck me about that was that she told you, I think she told you, that when it came to doing any big writing, two things. One, she knew that she had to tell this story. And the thing that really, really hit me from your story was this image she had almost of her mother kind of waving to her, almost saying, "You need to write about me." I mean, I get chills just talking about it.
Yeah,
right
it was really powerful. Yeah, and any of us who've done nonfiction writing, which is what we do all the time, right? We tend to write other people's stories, and I think some of us think that someday we wish we had the kind of a good story to write. So here's this woman who was, by horror, sort of inflicted with this tremendous story that she needed to tell for a variety of reasons, right?
Yeah.
Not only to sort of put things in order and come to an understanding. She's really against cliches, so come to terms with is a phrase she really hates. But yeah, and then to just maybe make some connections with that woman who was waving at her, keeping her from doing whatever else. The other thing that I found was really important, I thought, for her as she explained it to me, is that in that moment she describes in the book, when she is faced with this horrible scene and the need to get help, she describes how she sort of splits, and there's the little child, and then there's this more capable person. And through her life, I think, as she describes in the book and as she described to me, she let that capable person take over and push her through and survive, right? And then there came a time when she had to let the creative person back in. And the book is a meeting of the two, where she has sort of she reconnects with her mother, but she has reconnected those two aspects of herself.
Not without a little trauma. I mean,
Oh my God, yeah.
To have to go over, if we were just a journalist doing a story like this, and you go over those police reports, and you go over those scene photos, and all the things that go into a forensic investigation.
It's awful
It's
for
one thing.
us.
Yeah,
right? It's awful
right.
when
But-
we have to
but
deal
if
with
you were
awful
there
details.
and if it
right.
literally happened to you,
Right.
that's a heck of a mountain to climb before you can even start writing.
I mean, her burden was even greater. There was nobody arrested right after the crime,
Yeah, that's
and nobody was arrested until 2006, I think.
Right.
And
And she was told specifically, don't discuss what you
Right.
experienced, because we need to be able to, find the person responsible, and only they will know certain details. So, to some extent, for years, there was this sort of psychic connection. Sounds weird,
Yeah.
but like there was this invisible thread between
they
her.
were keeping the same secret.
Yeah.
Is the way she described it, I thought, in your piece, and that was fascinating. I mean, that was because you think about how you remember things. You remember the things you talk about. You remember the stories that you told. You remember the anecdotes, and it's really hard to. How do you continue to remember, very detailed events that happened that you can't tell anybody about? And I guess, that was what she.
Other than just running over and over them in your head.
Yeah.
Right.
For 20 years, and then I remember I covered the trial in 2007 of Michael Hutchison.
And he's the perpetrator.
He's the perpetrator. He was caught on a completely disconnected DNA match. His DNA was all over the crime scene, but he had no other connection to him. He was never a suspect. A lot of other guys were, but he was never a suspect. And then one day his DNA showed up. What I remember is her testimony. She testified in the present tense. She said, "I opened the door. I walked into the room. I ran out." I can't remember the exact events, but it was almost like she was describing a dream.
Really?
Yeah, and she heard the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. She
And,
sat and listened to the whole thing.
And apparently he didn't know she was in the bedroom.
Right.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
Yeah.
Now, it's the other thing that's interesting. We talk about, if we were doing a book like this, as distasteful as it might be, you would feel some obligation to talk to the murderer. Yet she decided not to do that.
And her rightful decision to do so.
Right.
Explain her rationale?
Well, I think she felt, well, as she described to me, she felt no obligation. You know, we have to be fair and balanced. This was
Even with a murder.
This was her story.
And
Yeah.
didn't she also say that she didn't want to?
She didn't want to give him the
platform.
right.
Yeah,
She didn't want to
platform.
give him the platform. And I think, and as I went in the conversation that we had, I was like, that really would have changed the story in a way. And this is her story to tell.
Yeah.
It's not really about him. It's about her
Right.
experience, her family's, and truthfully, the story. Goes way back to understand how her mother became who she was. So she brings the reader right back to her grandmother and the challenges that the family faced with domestic violence that is deeply rooted, domestic violence and substance abuse and other challenges.
Her
that
mother
they had.
married at age 15.
Right.
She was born when her mother was
8.
18. Yeah, she makes a point of that. Her mother was not pregnant when she got married. It was more a case of time to get out of the house. At 15,
Yeah.
she felt she had to leave home.
You look at the picture of the mother and Sarah when
Yeah,
she was
yeah.
very young.
They
and it
look
just
like sisters.
It just breaks your heart. Yeah, they do. But just how young
Yeah.
her mother was.
And she
in
was
that
beautiful.
photo. Yeah.
And she was beautiful, and Sarah is a beautiful woman. There's you can understand how, for whatever complications, her mom's life was sort of imbued with complications rooted in a difficult upbringing, that she gave Sarah great things as a woman and a person, and a great start, a great foundation. When I spoke with her, I felt that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's interesting as a writer to a lot of people come through our lives. You know, when we write about these stories, and then they're done, and the people go on and live their lives, and the case is out of the headlines, it's out of the news, and to hear the process somebody went through, so like beautifully told, of kind of building your life again, creating who you are, was just really fascinating.
Well, I felt a tremendous responsibility, and that we write people's stories, and often we're the first person to ever write their story.
Yeah.
Most people don't have a story told. If they're lucky, they don't have a story like this, right? So
Right.
their only story, maybe they have a story because they're a famous athlete, or they're this or that, but most people don't have a story told. And so if I do tell someone's story, I'm the first person. I feel a great obligation when they tell me details of their lives to get their voice correctly, to the voice, the details, whatever, the nuance of who they are. Well, this woman has spent 6 years of her life getting all the details of her life. Nobody knows her life better than she does, and she's written her life story, and she's written it well. So I felt I had some serious anxiety around getting her story as best I could.
There was a great line when she said that I didn't want somebody else to know more about me than I know about myself.
Right. In fact, some of the police, she said, did.
Yeah.
Going back to her old interviews and stuff like that.
That's true.
Yeah.
So she's almost like she's recreating herself.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
some interesting things. One thing that's remarkable about the book, and you guys as Mainers or adopted Mainers.
Thank you.
When I read books or see movies that characterize Maine, I am really picky. I can't deal with Maine accents that are run amok. I'm just like, well, this book's voice is so authentic, and the sense of place is very enveloping, and this is a good thing. And I discussed it with her. I was like, how did you manage to? And she's glad to hear that. She because it was one of the things she strove for, and she found a lot more information than she even put in the book. And so I'm not surprised. She's hoping to be a fiction writer, and I would not be surprised if some of what she gleaned from these reports, the dialogue, the dialect. She has a Word document full of little sayings of the way people talk and things, and I have a feeling we'll see some of her research cropping up in some
Well, it's
books
funny,
in the
they say
future.
when you're writing fiction, number one rule is write what you know. And she knows, clearly she knows.
Right.
She knows Maine, she knows her heritage. You know.
So what's the name of the book again?
After the Eclipse,
Okay, and
Sarah Perry.
Sarah Perry.
right, and your story is The Girl in the Next Room. It was in Sunday's paper. It's available on the website. Thank you for writing the story.
Great
Thank
story.
you for talking about it.
Thank you
about
for
it with
having
us.
me.
Thanks, Kelley.
Hey, Bill, there's a lot going on in Maine and nationally, but I'm thinking maybe a potential story of the year could be those two escaped
You mean
book
these
dolls.
two pit bulls pulling on my pants right now?
What happened there?
Well, the latest news, first of all, is that the animal shelter lady up in
Waterville.
Waterville has resigned, which, okay, I'd like to know more about exactly what happened up there. But the deal is that we have these two dogs who are essentially waiting to see if they're on death row. And they've been impounded, I believe, by the Winslow police at the Waterville shelter. And the woman who owns the dogs is coming by every day to walk them. And then along comes the day when it was it this law court? Or was it a Superior Court judge?
I think it was it was a lower court, and they had
upheld.
just issued the ruling.
Oh,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
just issued the rule.
Yeah.
Within an hour, she comes for her daily dog walk, and oops, they got away. They went into the woods.
Sorry,
They're
they ran
gone.
away. Yeah.
And I have never seen law enforcement officials express more skepticism more quickly about someone's story than this one.
Right.
And I mean, it convinced no one.
They were not acting as if they were concerned that there was two vicious pit bulls running around in the woods.
Which presumably someone would see sometime in the next 24 hours, which all these days later still hasn't happened. So, this was it's not really a heist. I don't know what it is, but you had to have a getaway car. Clearly.
Right. It's clearly it was I think one of the sheriffs said it was a coordinated effort.
Yeah,
we believe. What really intrigues me is this is the same shelter that had Dakota, the husky that the governor wanted to.
This is like the San Quentin of animal shelters.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'd like to I wonder if those dogs are in the Blaine house right now.
Well, I got to thinking. You can make dogs disappear really easily. Whether there's, who knows? They might not even be in Maine anymore. Although then again, on the other hand, how are you going to get rid of two vicious pit bulls? I mean, who's going to want them? It's not like they're little.
Right.
I
think there actually is a market for vicious pit bulls.
Well, yeah, I suppose. So they're probably down in Queens.
Right. They're guarding somebody's stash.
Right. But I doubt very much that they're still in the Waterville, Winslow area.
The great podcast Crime Town. Have you heard that?
Oh yeah.
So there was a guy. This drug dealer had these wolves all around his compound. And he said he got them from Maine. He's in Rhode Island, but he found an ad that somebody was selling wolf hybrids. And he said, I'd really like real wolves. I don't want hybrids. And the guy said, well, it's against the law. And then the guy says, and one thing led to another, and I got the dogs. I got the
bada
wolves.
bing, bada bing.
Bada boom. I got, So, yes, there is a market for...
Well, I guess you go on Craigslist, you say two pit bulls in need of a home, proven killers.
Nothing to live for,
They need to get out of Maine fast. So I suppose if they ever find the dogs and can disprove the woman's story, she should probably be charged with something. I don't know what it would be, but some kind of obstruction, I would think, charged, because the court had ordered that the dogs be put down. She could claim she didn't know about that order because she moved so fast. But who knows? I mean, this is This is a, quick thinking, and off they go.
Well, we'll have to depend on our colleagues up at the Central Maine Morning Sentinel.
Yeah.
Your old newspaper.
Keep their eyes out.
Yeah, this is a good one.
And we should keep our eyes out, too.
Okay.
Who knows where they drop them off?
Everybody should.
Maybe
All right.
they're out in Westbrook hunting the python right now. Who knows?
All right. That's it for this week.
See ya.
This is a Press Herald podcast. You can hear past episodes at pressherald.com/podcasts. You can subscribe on iTunes, on Android devices, and stream on Stitcher. Please email comments and questions to letterstotheeditor@pressherald.com. Thank you for listening.